Think of the person you are now, and think of the person you'll be after you know how to make this cube in Blender 2.8. Yeah, keep watching. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Derek Elliott from Dirk.com, and today I have my first ever Blender 2.8 tutorial. If you wonder where I've been, well, 2.8 might have something to do with it. It was a little intimidating at first, but honestly, it's so cool. I am not intimidated by it anymore, and it's time to get going with some tutorials. So without further ado, please join me while we create that cool little volumetric cube you saw in the intro. Now, to create the scene, we're actually going to use the lamp, the cube, and the camera, so you don't actually have to delete anything. How cool is that? So let's just first get our workspace set up a little bit here so that we can see a little bit better what's going on with a couple new windows here. And I'm just clicking in these corners here and dragging to create these. So I want this window over here to be my camera view, and I want that to be rendered. And so we'll just click right there, and we can also turn off these overlays and hide that little toolbar. So we got our render view right there. I want to leave this one just how it is, and then in this view, I'm going to make that a shader editor. And we'll also be using this viewport up here to work with our graphs to make this animation looping, which is going to be a key part of this tutorial. So let's go ahead and get started on that volumetric material. So what I'm going to do is just actually get rid of this principled shader by pressing X to delete it. And now I'm going to add a Shift A to add a shader, and that'll be a volume scatter shader. So when I drop that in there, nothing happens. And that's because we actually need to go over here into our render tab and enable volumetric. And that's just kind of one of the things with EEVEE. You got to mess with all these checkboxes over here, but they're not too intimidating once you know what they do. And depending on how powerful your computer is and how fast you want your viewport to be, do whatever you need here, but I'm actually going to bump this tile size all the way down to 2 pixels just so that it's a little bit clearer. So now with that volume enabled, I'm actually going to take this lamp and put it right there in the middle. So I'm going to press Shift S with that selected and snap my selection, which is the lamp, to my cursor, which is in the center. And now we have that volumetric effect kind of being lit up a little bit by that lamp. So with that there, now we can go ahead and start adding some textures to this volume so that it gets that nice smoky, noisy effect. So I'm going to press Control T with that volume scatter selected, and that's going to create these nodes. If you were not able to press Control T, then you probably need to go into your user preferences and enable the Node Wrangler add-on. We're going to be using that quite a bit here. It really speeds up the process, so I highly recommend you turn that on. And yeah, so we're not going to use an image texture, so I'm going to press Shift S and switch this to a texture noise texture. You can play with some of these different ones, but the noise texture I think works pretty well for this. And so that we can see what we're doing a little bit better with this noise texture, I'm actually going to press Shift A and add a converter color ramp, and that's going to give us a little bit more control. If we Shift Control left click on that color ramp, we can see what's going on. Again, that's with the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, so make sure you have that. So with this color ramp, I can kind of see what's going on here. If I mess with this scale, I don't want any. I want these transitions between the smoky area and the empty area to be really sharp. So I'm going to change this from being a linear color ramp to constant. And then when I pull this over, you can see we've got these nice sharp transitions. And just to smooth that out even more, I'm going to get rid of this detail value, and that's going to just make it nice and round. Now, one thing you'll notice is that it's being projected with a UV right now, which is giving us some kind of funky seams that I don't want. So I'm going to switch this from UV to object, and that's just going to balance this out and kind of project it a little bit more evenly around our object. But with that, we also got the texture scaled down quite a bit, so I'm just going to drag this down until we've got a nice big fat volumey look. Something like that's probably going to be pretty good for me. And if you want to see this without that, you can Shift Control left click to pop that in. Okay, so honestly, I think that looks pretty good. Now, if we go over here to this mapping node, we can see what these do. So when we do Z, and let's actually just preview our color ramp so we can see a little easier what's going on. And we can unplug that volume so it's a little faster. So when we rotate on the Z, you can see it rotates around the Z, Y around the Y, and X around the X, just as you'd expect. So to create that kind of moving motion, if you will, inside the object, we're actually going to animate these values. And now this is where we get into just some small details of how to make this loop seamlessly. So what I'm going to do is go to frame 0 here. Actually, now's a good time to decide how long you want your animation to be. For me, I want it to be 10 seconds long at 24 frames per second. So if we do the math on that, this whole animation needs to be 240 frames in length. So I'm actually going to go, instead of frame 1, I'm going to go to frame 0, which is not going to be rendered, and insert a single keyframe on this Z rotation, and then insert a single keyframe on that X rotation. So we get some kind of dynamic motion going on. And then with those keyframes inserted, I'm actually going to go all the way down to frame 240 here, and then just increase these values to 360 so that it gets a full rotation and everything moves nice and seamlessly. You can see now, the reason we put this on frame 0 is that had we put it on frame 1, then frame 1 and frame 240 would be exactly the same, and we'd have just a slight little stutter in our animation, but we don't want that, so we actually put it on frame 0 so that that's the frame, same as frame 240. Try it out for yourself, but yeah, you don't want that little stutter in there, so we work with frame 0. Likewise, you could put your other keyframe on frame 1 and then frame 241, and that would work the same way. I just like to use 0. I don't know why. Don't worry about it. So we've got this rotating, looking good. Now let's go ahead and preview this back with the volume, and we can get rid of that viewer. So now we have our rotation, and if we actually preview that color ramp again and press play, we'll see that it kind of speeds up and slows down. You can see towards the end here it really slows down, and that's because there's actually some easing going on with these keyframes. They're being interpolated kind of, they're being smoothed out, but I want it to just continuously loop. So to help sell that effect, we're actually going to go over here into the graph editor. Let's make sure we first select the mapping node that has those keyframes on it. Go into the graph editor. We just press G, we'll get there. And I'm going to press period on my number pad so that we can see. So this is the easing I was talking about. So what I want to do to get rid of that is just press T and change that to linear. And now when we play it, we'll see that it just kind of moves at a constant rate, and you can't even tell when the animation ends. So that's perfect. And we'll do this a couple more times to make sure everything is nice and fluid, or smoky, whatever you want to call it. So let's pop back over here into the shader editor, and now we can, let's get rid of that. Let's get the look of this set up just a little bit more. So I think the first thing I'll do is go over here into my world tab and turn the strength of the world down to 0. So we've got this nice black space. Now if we take our lamp and kind of move it around, you can see that that's kind of having some cool effects there. Just a little easier to see. We can also go over here into the volume scatter and change that density up a little bit so it's nice and thick, and maybe we can actually move this scale down just a tad too, so we've got some really good volume going on in there. That volume is loud, bro. That was so lame, sorry. Let's change the color here. I think something like a Dirk red, and yes, by golly, it's red, it's not orange. Stop telling me it's orange. I think that looks pretty good. So now when we kind of play through this, oh yeah, looking super dope. That's going to be cool. Maybe we can actually move the scale up a little bit. Play with these settings as much as you want. I'm just trying to get something nice and balanced for our little intro video, which you guys already saw. That's how I do my tutorials. I put the video that we make in the tutorial in the intro so that you're getting exactly what you came for. So yeah, that's in there, looking good. Now to enhance the effect of this just a little more, we are going to add kind of like a little box around the outside, and you can do kind of whatever you want for that. But the way to do that is by adding a wireframe modifier. So if we zoom in here, pull this thickness up a little bit, we can see that it's giving a nice box around the outside, but we can't really see it over here. And that's because it's actually making this box out of the same material that the volume is made out of. So to have that wire take on a different material, we need to go over here into our materials tab. Let's go ahead and name this first one volume. And then with this little plus sign, we can add a new material slot. And let's just press new and name that wire. Now, to get that to display properly, we need to go back into our modifier and then just change this material offset to 2. And that will mean that it gets the second material in this list here. So that was the first one, offset it by 1, and you got that one right there. So now we can just kind of play with this material to make it whatever we want. I really like it just being like a dark kind of black nothingness. So the way I actually do that is with an emission shader. So I'm going to press Shift S, change that to an emission shader, which you'd think is the opposite of what I want. But if we just turn the strength down to 0, and it doesn't matter what the color is, then it'll be nice and black. Now, one thing you can do also back in the wireframe modifier is just change this offset all the way up to 1, so it's kind of sitting on the outside of this cube. So that's pretty cool. Next thing I think I want to do is set up my camera. So let's select that camera with left click. Yes, that's right. Left click to select. Times are changing, and I want to get that camera right in kind of a good spot that's just sort of head on. So G is how you move things, and so if you press Alt G, it will reset the location, and then similarly, if you press Alt R, it'll reset the rotation. So now I know I have this just in a nice, it's all evened up. So now if I press N and just kind of move this back, something like that. Let's rotate it on the X, 90 degrees. We can see it comes into view over here. Maybe move this back. And I'm holding Control to make it snap at these nice even increments. I think I'm just like a perfectionist, so it has to be even. But, we could change it to 9.84. Never mind. That's going to kill me. Let's leave it at 10. So I'm going to left click just like my cube. And the next thing I want to do to make this animation even more dynamic is to have this cube spinning. So the way I'm going to do that is over here in this object tab. Let's just kind of pick a nice initial orientation, maybe kind of tilt that down a little bit, tilt it around, and yeah, I think we'll have it start something like that. So to have it spin, we want to rotate it along the Z axis. So same thing we did before. Let's go over here to frame 0, insert a single keyframe for Z, and then on frame 240, we're going to press plus 360 to have it do a full rotation and insert another keyframe. So now it should loop seamlessly, but again, we're going to have that same problem. So let's pop over here into the graph editor and press T to switch that to a linear interpolation. And now you can see it loops nice and seamlessly. So that's looking pretty good. We got most of this set up. Most of the tricky stuff is done here. Well, that's not true. The next part is a little tricky, but it really adds to the animation, I gotta tell you. So let's go ahead and do that. And that's going to be to make this light right here kind of bounce around inside this cube. So the way we're going to do that, you could just kind of manually add keyframes and have it move different places, but we can actually do that procedurally with modifiers. Yes, that is right. We can use modifiers on the animation here. So the way I'm going to do that is I just need a keyframe to start with. So if I'm looking at my camera view here, I want this to kind of just move all around. So that's going to be moving, if we've got that lamp selected, we move it on the Z is going to be up and down. The X is going to be left and right. Y would be forwards and backwards, but it's kind of hard to tell, so I'm just going to ignore that. So this actually doesn't matter what keyframe you're on. So I'm just going to insert a single keyframe for the X location, hit that button right there, and the Z location, hit that button right there. So now we got some keyframes in there and we can start adding modifiers. Now to do that, what we need to do is just select one of these, and then I'm going to press N to bring up this sidebar, and we can see we have this little tab right here, modifiers, and we can add a modifier, and the one we're going to use is noise. Yes, noise is the star of the show today. Noise modifier, noise texture. So if we kind of zoom in here, we can see what this is doing. It's just kind of jittering back and forth on that X axis. Now it's not really moving a lot, and it's moving a little bit too fast. It's not moving very far, and it's moving too fast. So if we pull this out, we can actually see what these settings we have here are. So scale is going to, let's go ahead and move that up, see what it does. So that'll make it, well, you can't really see it. So let's actually adjust the strength first. So yeah, strength is what's going to make this move further away. And I'm fine with it bouncing outside a little bit, but Yeah, that looks pretty good. Now it is still moving a little fast, so now is when we want to edit the scale. And that'll just stretch this out. Basically anywhere you see a peak here is going to be kind of a movement. So that's looking pretty good. Maybe bump the scale up a little more so it's not quite so fast. That's looking pretty good. Maybe move it down so it's a little bit faster, and then let's adjust that strength here. See, if we find a high peak here, that's going to be kind of a good way to see what our furthest distance is. So let's bring that strength down. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And that's pretty much set up. So now what we need to do is do the same thing on the Z location, but it's not going to take nearly as long, because what we can do is press this little button right here, and that is going to copy the modifier. And then I can just click Z and I can paste the modifier. But since it pastes it exactly, you can see it's just moving in a diagonal now. So all we need to do is just kind of change this offset here. And that's just going to find a different place in the noise pattern. And now we're getting exactly what we want. That's looking pretty good. So now you may be wondering, how do we make this loop? And that's a little bit trickier. So if we go here to, let's press A to select those both, press period. Oops, that's going to be kind of funky. Okay, so if we take a look here at these, we've got, that's frame 240 and that's frame 1. So you can see it is not looping. So the way we can make it loop is actually we're basically going to apply these modifiers, and that's going to be doing a process called baking the action. So this is the action, and we basically need to turn that into, keyframes we can work with. So the way we do that is with this lamp selected, we can go into object, and then there is an animation. Let's see here. So we've got object, and then you might need to scroll a little bit. Somewhere around here, object, animation, there it is on it. Bake action. Okay, and now there is actually a setting here we want to change. So frame step, basically what this is going to do is, instead of using the modifier to control this, it's going to put points, keyframes at all these little spots to basically mimic what is happening with the noise. Now we don't need 240 little points, so we just want this to be, a few. So the way we can do that is with the frame step. So I'm just going to change this so that it only drops a keyframe every 15 frames. I think that'll be pretty good. So if we press OK, now you can see it has created keyframes for all those movements. And now what we can do is basically just copy the keyframe from frame 1, which will move to 0, and put it at 240, and we'll be all set. So there is one problem though. We've got, when we bake the action, it baked the action for everything, even the stuff that we had not animated. So all we animated was the X and the Z location. So if we hide those and then press A to select everything, X to delete them, you can see now we've just got these two still over here. So let's turn that back on so we can see. And yeah, we're looking pretty good. We just got those two. So now let's do exactly what I was just saying. I'm going to press Alt A to deselect, C to circle select those two keyframes. And then for 1, I want to move them back to 0. Boom, right there. And then I'm going to press Shift, let's zoom out so we can see everything, Shift D. And then if I press X, it'll constrain to the X axis, and it's just going to slide this all the way around. Don't worry if it goes a little bit past. We're going to zoom in here, and now GX to move those back in, right to 240. And now if we put that right there at 240, and then we go over here to frame 0, boom, you can see it stays perfectly. And now we have our noise texture rotating in a looping fashion. We have our cube looping, and we have our light bouncing around also looping. So now we have a true looping animation. So if we press spacebar to play this, you can see it seamlessly transitions from the end to the start. So you can play this for hours, but you only have to render 10 seconds worth, which is pretty cool. So guys, that's about it for this tutorial. Maybe now would be a good time to go over here into your render tab, turn on bloom, look at how ridiculous it is, It is kind of beautiful though. Maybe let's turn this threshold up a little bit so that we just have it kind of affecting where that light is. So yeah, now come over here, change your render settings. You want to post it to Instagram maybe, which by the way, you should. If you do, tag me at Derek J. Elliott. I'll throw up the tag somewhere on the screen here. And yeah, have fun with this. It's really simple. Blender 2.8 is nothing to be afraid of. EEVEE is super fun. You can do all sorts of things. Doesn't take long to render. So yeah, have fun with it. Show me what you make, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see the next tutorial. I'm going to be doing a lot more with 2.8, obviously, as that is the new hot thing in the Blender world. And like the video, leave a comment if you have suggestions for tutorials that you'd like to see. And yeah, have fun. I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.